He has trained over 500 geologists and engineers from 56 companies in 10 countries. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jaffrey. Thank you so much for coming today. Thank you for attending, everyone, and I hope that you enjoy this. So here you go.
All right, well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Can everyone see my screen? You should be seeing a picture of Utah with some logos from the WGA, the EMD, and then SME. Can everyone see that? Yes, all right. Sounds good. Okay, so I would like to start by thanking the WGA, the EMD, and the SME for hosting me, and especially Mike. Mike has gone out of his way to do this for me, and he has just been instrumental in putting this thing together. And I cannot thank him enough for doing that. Also, I just want to say Mike is the moderator today. And if you have any questions, please type those in the chat box. And then Mike will read those out to me at the end of the talk. And when you are asking questions, let's, just for the sake of time, because we are expecting quite a few people today. Just for the sake of time, we want to keep them set strat focused. I know there's a lot of folks from overseas and a lot of folks that are not familiar with uranium. So if you're interested in uranium enrichment, this is not the place. All right, let's keep it focused on set strat. But with that, I will go ahead and get started. So I want to start by thanking my mentors. That's Bill Boberg, who is here today, Tony Koscheck, who I'm hoping is here. I know Fred's here, and then Matthew Rhodes. And I'm just fortunate to have met these high quality individuals, whether it was inviting me over, just to chit chat at their own place, or formal training sessions on Zoom, or me sending out an email at the end of a field day and be like, hey, I'm looking at this mineral, what do you think this is? And them getting back to me within an hour. I mean, I'm super grateful to these individuals. So what that means is today, if you think you learned something useful, it's because of these rock stars right here. And if you think this was a waste of time, well, that's all me. I'll tell you what, if the uranium doesn't interest you, you will get to see some pretty cool outcrop photos. And since most of you are geologists, hopefully you will enjoy that. So what is the plan? Well, the plan is we're going to talk about what the old timers recommended when it comes to finding uranium, what mining companies are currently doing specifically in the US. And then we're going to talk about bringing sedimentology back into sediment-hosted uranium deposits. That is the plan. And as promised, with the cool pictures, here's my first one. Here's a theropod footprint that you can see in this mine from the Morrison Formation in Utah. You can see some beautiful logs in here as well. So what do the old timers recommend? Now, I know this is kind of an American term here, so I just want to clarify this since we do have quite a few folks from overseas. This is, when I say old timers, this is not a derogatory term or implying someone's age. What I mean here are people who are miners, people who are engineers, geoscientists, who've devoted their entire careers to actually being out there. And so when I talk about these principles, these are actually field-based principles that they've come up with. And when I first started looking at uranium, these were certain things that were thrown out at me. And hopefully today I will be able to put these into some sedimentological and stratigraphic context for you. So one of the first ones is go for the sandstones right above the gray-green mudstones, which is what you see right here. This is a picture of the Cougar mine in a slick rock mining district. And you can see the adits right there, right at that interface between those gray mudstones and the sandstones. You can see some rolls right there. Look for petrified wood. Uranium won't be far from that. Look for dinosaur bones. We used to send truckfuls to the mill, and indeed, I have stumbled upon quite a few mines where you can see just entire sauropod bones that have just been shattered. Someone's packed those up and taken those away to the mill to be grinded up, and they're just completely mineralized with uranium. It's got to be a 50-50 sand-shale ratio. So by shale, they meant the mud rocks that you're finding in this fluvial system. Here's a picture from the Uravan mining district. Then Entrada sandstone, which is Aeolian, is at the base. And right above that is the Morrison. And in the Morrison, you're seeing that there is indeed a 50% proportion of sandstone versus mudstone. So what are mining companies currently doing in the US? Well, a lot of them are using old-timer principles to find uranium. They're drilling a lot of boreholes, running gamma ray logs, PFN logs, taking lots of cuttings and some core. And then I'm going to be talking a lot about slabbing core because I'm a sedimentologist, and I'm hoping that if you are working in uranium right now, especially if you're going to the uranium company, you will strongly consider taking core if you're not taking any, and if you are taking core, actually slabbing core, because that is key. Once uranium grade is calculated, essentially following colors, you're mapping pretty colors underground. And in places like Wyoming and Texas, mainly ISR methods. I know for a lot of you, this is just, you know this already if you're in the US and you're working uranium, but you have to keep in mind that there's a lot of folks that are tuning in from overseas. Now, what I want to be clear about is when you're going through this talk, I am certainly not trying to reinvent the wheel. Okay, I'm not here trying to be a smart aleck saying, hey, we're doing things wrong and here's a better way of doing things. That is definitely not what I'm saying. This methodology that people have been employing has been around for almost 4 decades and it works super well. That's why people are doing it. Again, all I'm saying is that we need to put some more sedimentology back into sediment-hosted uranium exploration. So just so you know what the plan is today, the plan is, this is some work that I've been involved with over the past year. I've spent about 90 field days out there visiting some of the top mining districts, uranium mining districts on the Colorado Plateau. And here's a list of those districts, and all these numbers correspond with the map right here. For those of you who are not familiar with these states, we're looking at the southwestern portion of the United States. In this map right here, you can see the names of the states. On top is the number of mines, and at the bottom are tons of uranium ore produced. As far as stratigraphic intervals, we're looking at mainly strata going from the Triassic up to the Cretaceous. The arrows that I'm pointing towards are stratigraphic units. All right, I was told I need to admit people through the participant window. Okay, there we go, admit all.
My apologies. When
No,
I made
no.
you host, you're also in charge of the
All right, no, that is totally okay. I'm glad you reminded me. All right, sweet. So we had another almost about 50 people just join. So, all right. So, anyways, these are the stratigraphic units I will be talking about today. So let's go ahead and get started. The way I've broken this talk down is I want to devote equal amount of time to uranium deposits in fluvial systems and shallow marine systems, shallow marine clastics, in aeolian systems, and then in carbonates. So we're going to start with fluvial systems, and the first ones I'm going to talk about the Jurassic Morrison Formation, which has produced tons of uranium from the Colorado Plateau. And again, our understanding of the Morrison has jumped leaps and bounds over the past 20 some years. Now we consider the Morrison a part of a distributary fluvial system. So that's not an alluvial fan. That is a point sourced basin scale fluvial system, which roughly forms a fan like this. Now there's a few things that are happening. The first thing you need to know is that there's climatic change. We're going from arid to humid, and we're doing so over a period of about 7 million years. Okay. Now, why is that important? Well, that's important for 2 different reasons. Number one, the climate influences alluvial architecture. And the second thing is that when we're trying to preserve organic matter, and that's something I'm going to talk about a lot, certain climatic regimes are more conducive to preserving those versus others. But anyways, looking at this roughly fan-like geometry, there's a few things that I want you to know. So let me do this. Let me see if I can get a mouse and some annotations on these slides here. All right, so all right, so here's my new and improved mouse, and let's see if we can actually draw something on there. All right, so let's see. There we go. So let's assume this is an active fluvial channel. Let's assume there's a herd of sauropods migrating across that channel, and a bunch of them die in there. They plug up this channel. Boom, we trigger another one. That gets bogged down by a log jam during a flood, and then we initiate another channel. Okay, so you've got an avulsion node right here, and then this thing avulses quite a bit. So avulsion is a huge part of the system. Okay. The Shinle is also very similar, except that it's a very different climatic regime. We're talking about a very wet seasonal climate. It is still a part of one of these distributary fluvial systems. Higher sinuosity in the Shinle than the Morrison. So how does this relate to uranium? Trust me, I'm going to come back to this. So let's look at some of these systems in a little bit more detail. Now, when we are in the proximal part of the DFS, the distributary fluvial systems, we are looking at amalgamated channels. Now, when you're looking at amalgamated channels, you are starting to get super thick sand bodies. And for those of you who have worked Colorado Plateau uranium, you know when you're getting into sand bodies that are thicker than about 50 feet in thickness, you're not finding that much uranium. And you're like, well, why is that? Well, for multiple reasons. Well, first of all, you have so much scour and fill, you're not really preserving organic material, which is essentially the reductant in the system. Secondly, let's assume you did have some reductant, you have a channel that incisors into it, it picks up some of that reductant as a basal lag. Well, then you have another scouring event, and what that scouring event is going to do is that's going to remove that material again. So you keep doing this over and over and over again. Also, if you want to think about ash beds within the system, since you have so much reworking, you're not really preserving much in the proximal part of the system. Then you get into the medial part of the system, and this is kind of like the Goldilocks syndrome. Okay, it's got to be just right. You're getting in the middle part of the system, and now the channel sand bodies are not as thick. They are still amalgamated, but they're not amalgamating in a multi-story style, but in a multilateral style. They are separated by overbank deposits. Okay, so if you do have ash beds, you know, you are going to preserve those. And then when you're getting into a distal setting, now you're pretty much running out of the channels. Well, if you're running out of the channels, you are running out of those high perm, high bays, that oxidizing fluids carrying the uranium ash. You know, you're basically running out of those. Okay, so what do these actually look like? Here's some photos from the outcrop. This is what a very proximal system looks like. So all you're seeing are just amalgamated channels. Again, not very conducive. You look at this middle slide, and you can see that we're getting into that 50% sandstone proportion that a lot of these old timers talked about. Okay. You get into the lower part of the system, and now you're seeing that the channels are almost gone at this point. Now let's plot the uranium mines on there. Now, just so we're clear, these are not my maps. These were generated by Adrian Hartley's group, which he's a professor out of the UK, and he had his students work on the alluvial architecture, specifically of the salt wash member in the Morrison Formation. And then you're like, since we're doing this already, let's just put uranium on there and see if there's a relevance there, if there's some sort of correlation between sand body thickness, or I should say channel proportion, versus uranium mining. And when they did that, you can see that they found out that 97% of the uranium mines within this region, so here's Colorado, here's Utah, New Mexico, and Arizona. So this includes the Uravan mining district, that also includes the Henry Mountains. A lot of those mapped out between the 40% to 50% contours for channel sand body proportion. Now, for those of you who are looking at this, they're like, well, wait a minute, what's going on here? Why is this anomalous? Well, it's anomalous because at the time, there was some deflection going on here, and the sand bodies here were not that amalgamated, okay? So that is why you have that anomaly there. But overall, the pattern works pretty well, and I've been trying to convince Adrian. I said, you need to send your grad students to the Grants Mining District and see if you can reproduce this work and map out the DFS, the Morrison DFS down there, and see if this works out over there as well. Bottom line is, how do you actually use this? Well, first of all, there's tons of areas across the globe, most of these stands, like if for the folks that are working in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, even Pakistan, you've got these active mountain ranges like the Pamirs and the Himalayas. And of course, they're sourcing these large distributary fluvial systems. And those can be mapped out, and they can be used as a predictive tool as to where you would hopefully find uranium deposits, assuming a source is there. So can we predict uranium occurrence on a basin scale in fluvial systems? I would say, yeah, we have a fairly good shot at it. But now this is the basin scale. Let's talk about this at a mine scale. Okay, so there we go. We have no more people coming in. All right, good. So when we're looking at the mine scale, I'm going to take a very different approach here. This talk was scheduled for Casper, so I've got a picture of the North Platte right outside Casper on the slide right now. And what I want you to think about is some flow dynamics here. So you've got a fluvial systems. Here's a thalweg. Okay, that is our high perm highway. So if you bury this in the subsurface, this is where we have the largest grain sizes, the best sorting. So if there's oxidizing fluids carrying uranium, this is their high perm highway right here, and they're going to keep going. They're going to keep going until they get stopped. Well, why would they stop? Well, they're stopping if there's some change in permeability and porosity, or they're stopping because you put a whole bunch of reductant in there. Okay. Now, but where is the reductant? The reductant are the organics, and you can see those are growing on the sides, but that's not where you have the sandstones. Okay, so what would you find if you actually went and trenched out there? So here's a picture from the Slick Rock mining district, and what you're looking at is the top of a bar. You're looking at the top of a unit bar, and this feature is actually a root trace, and inside the U trace is all this carnotite. Okay, and oftentimes when I've been out there, you can see these rooted zones, not at the base of the channel, but at the top of the channel, where you're exposing the tops of unit bars, or maybe you're on the top of the point bar where you have an entire rooted zone. And that is where you've got uranium precipitation because of the reductant. Now, the plan was to hand out this sample that I brought that's got something like 7,000 parts per million uranium in it. And if you look at it, it's not a sandstone, it's a siltstone. So why the siltstones? We're going to talk about this in a lot of detail. And before I jump into it, I want you to think about settling velocities. Okay? If you take a piece of wood, or if you've got a leaf and you disintegrate it, now it's just an organic flake. What is the settling velocity of an organic flake? And folks have done work on it. And the settling velocity of these organic flakes is roughly equivalent to silt-sized quartz clasts. Okay, so think about siltstones are the places where you're trying to get that. I mean, those are spots where you're most likely to have settling of these organic parts. But we're going to take it up a notch. Okay, I'm going to talk about plant taphonomy, and you guys are going to be like, "Oh my lord, this guy's killing me. He's going to talk about plant taphonomy. I came here to learn about uranium." But trust me, I'm going to bring it back, and it's going to matter. Okay, so what is taphonomy? Taphonomy is actually the process of fossilization. We break it down into three parts. It's the actual death of the organism, whether it's a plant or an animal. What happens to that organism before burial? And then what happens to that organism after burial? Okay, all these things matter. Now, luckily, some pretty brilliant folks have already done the taphonomy work in the Morrison and in the Shinley, mainly Tim Demko, who's now with Exxon. He did a bunch of stuff out there. And what he's done is he's basically categorized accumulations of plant material into three different categories. You've got allochthonous, which is stuff that's been moved around, autochthonous, stuff which is still in place, and then there's the para-autochthonous assemblage. This includes stuff which is basically logs in basal lags, fairly common from the 50-some mines in the Morrison that I've visited. Autochthonous, this I've never seen. Doesn't mean it's not out there. It's definitely there, which is why Tim Demko has it on there. And then para-autochthonous is super common. We're specifically talking about leaves and where they're settling. Okay. Now, that's step number one. Okay, this is the stuff. Okay, where does it if you have logs, if you've got plant material, even if you have dinosaurs in a system, if they're dying, where are they most likely to accumulate in the system? Okay, we can predict that. Step number 2 is, well, once you've placed them there, how likely are we to preserve that? So this is the last part of taphonomy, which is the diagenesis part. And for that, what I've got on your screen here is a EH-PH plot, okay? Because the preservation of dinosaurs versus plants it's very different, but we're going to focus specifically on plant material here, okay? And if you're looking at this, here's the pH, here's the EH, and on this plot, the red boundary that you've seen, those are fresh fluvial sediments. Okay, that's what this plot is for. It's for fresh fluvial sediments. And if you're looking at this zone, okay, so we're looking at low EH values and we're looking at low pH values. So we're looking at acidic systems with low EH values. That is where the chances of preserving the organic material is the highest. Okay, now when I initially started looking at this, the plan was to not just look at organic preservation. The plan was to actually look at fluvial architectural elements. And my plan was to go in, strictly sedimentological approach. All right, I'm going to go in, I'm going to compare unit bars, point bars, crevasse plays, lacustrine deltas from trunk fluvial channels, bedload sheets, and see if one lithofacies type was more likely to contain uranium mineralization than the other. But when I started looking into it, I realized that, you know what? No, it's not the fluvial architectural element that matters. What matters is where you're more likely to preserve the reductant. Okay, so let's take a look at some examples. Here's from the Shinley Formation in the Henry Mountains District. We've got some organic rich siltstone. You can see the carnotite in there. Right on top of it is a channel. And what I want you to look at are these black specks, okay? Now, so the channel has cut into this organic rich siltstone full of leaves. It's taking those organic specks and now it's moving them around. Would a channel like that be a good host for uranium? Absolutely, okay? In fact, traditionally, when you first start reading about uranium in sediment-hosted systems, especially fluvial systems, everyone is like, well, the uranium is going to be in the channels. Well, I'm going to tell you that just the opposite. I'm going to tell you that, yes, the uranium can be in the channel if you satisfy 2 different conditions, okay, or one of 2 conditions. Either your channel is incising into material that is super organic rich, and as a result, it's got disseminated organics in it, or you've got a logjam. Okay, those are the only 2 ways you're going to get enough reductant in that channel for those oxidizing uranium-rich fluids to come in and drop out the uranium right at that location. That's one option. The other option is if those 2 things are not present, if you don't have logjams, and if the channel is not bringing up pebble lags or disseminated organics, well, man, you know what? That channel is not going to contain much uranium. Okay, and again, I'm going to hammer in on this. I'm going to show you some examples. Here's another example. This is, again, in the Henry Mountains. We're looking at the Shinley. The green that you're seeing is malachite associated with copper. And I started walking around and I'm like, and you're looking at a point bar deposits. You can see beautiful IHS in there. And in that point bar are logs of different orientations. And again, they are providing the reductant for uranium. I'm going to zoom in on one of these logs, and here's the carnotite right on there. Okay. Here's another example. Now, traditionally, folks call this trash, and I see this on LinkedIn and other places in the literature all the time. Oh, there's so here's the good stuff and here's the trash. And I'm going to tell you that this trash is actually treasure because it is the key to figuring out where the uranium is going to be. Now, this right here is the Cave Canyon mine. This is in the Uravan mining district. This is in the Saltwash member of the Morrison. And what I want you to focus, before you start looking at the carnotite, I want you to focus on this sandstone right here that is getting skinnier and skinnier. What you're looking at is inclined heterolithic stratification. That is lateral accretion that you get in a point bar. So again, you've got a point bar. The uranium is not at the base of the point bar. It is not at the base of the channel. It is at the top of the point bar. Well, why is that? Well, again, think about a flooding episode. If you've ever seen a river in flood, during waning flow, the last thing to settle out are the clays and the organics. And if you go to a tropical river, I do field work on the modern Indus in Pakistan. I've done field work in Java, Indonesia. Even in places like South Carolina, if you go after a major storm, if you go out of the point bar, what is the point bar covered with? It's covered by woody debris and leaves. And that's what you're seeing here. All of these are leaves. And of course, those are providing the reductant for this uranium. And that is the reason why this mine is there. This mine is not there because people are drilling, we're digging into channels. Okay, that's not why it's there. Here's another example. So I've showed you uranium from two different point bars. Now we're moving on. Okay, what you're looking here are aggregating ripples from the Shinley Formation. And here is the uranium banding. Okay, you also have vanadium in there, which is why it looks sooty like that. But essentially, you've got aggregating ripples where you don't get aggregating ripples on the base of a channel. Okay, that's where you get cross sets. Where are you getting these aggregating ripples? Where aggregating ripples, especially climbing ripples, signify rapid flow deceleration. So where do you get them? Well, you get them at a meander bend when the flow just cuts across and you get a crevasse play, and that's what we're looking at right here. We're looking at a crevasse play deposit. And again, these are some mines. This is the Shinnerow mine right outside Moab. Okay, super accessible. You can go out there, take a look at this stuff. Beautifully exposed crevasse play, and that's what's producing the uranium. Here's another example. This is in the Henry Mountains. And what do you see? Again, beautifully preserved climbing ripples, not a channel. This right here is, again, a crevasse play deposits. And again, you can see some of the carnotite that's on there. So I'll show you one more example because I want to be done with fluvial systems so we can move on to the other depositional systems. This is a unit bar. Okay, so what is a unit bar? Well, unit bars are also known as alternating bars or alternate bars, and they're sitting in the channel, again, not at the base of the channel, but on top of the bedload sheet. So if you're looking at a unit bar, there's the very top, you're seeing lower flow regime plain beds right here. And again, where is the uranium? It's not at the base. The uranium's at the very top. Why is the uranium at the very top? There's vanadium in there too. Why? Well, that's because, again, those organics, like the clays, are the last class to settle out of suspension. Okay, so they are going to be they're going to be deposited on the top. Yes, this rock is fantastic as a high perm highway for oxidizing fluids carrying the uranium. So yeah, the uranium is going to go through, but if you want that uranium to stop, okay, well, in that case, this is where it's stopping. Okay, the reductant is right there. And again, what I don't want you to go away thinking is, well, Ali said that there is no uranium in Colorado Plateau, Morrison, and Shinley. Well, that would be ridiculous. Okay, I'm definitely not saying that there is no uranium in any channel on the Colorado Plateau. All I'm saying is that this whole channel thing has been pushed a lot. It's been very generalized. And yes, channels can contain uranium if they are incising and they've incorporated pebbles that are organic rich, such as in this case. Okay, here not only do you have the beautiful carnotite in there, you've got some malachite and azurite as well. So you've got some copper going on. So you can get it that way, or if you've got a log jam. So those, but you do need one of those two for it to happen. Now, I have read the literature, and I'm assuming someone at the end of this talk is going to be like, well, you know what, Ali, I have been to this mine, and if you haven't been to that mine, there's absolutely no trace of organics there whatsoever. And yet we produced X amount of tons from it. You know what? Maybe I haven't been to that mine yet. These are preliminary results. So far, it's just 50 mines. Maybe when I get up to 500 mines, I will also find some that have no organics whatsoever. Okay, no dinosaurs, nothing. Remember, even dinosaur dead bodies produce humic acids, so keep that in mind. So anyways, we're done with fluvial systems. We're going to move on. Same theme when it comes to deltas. All right, so think about it this way. You've got a shallow marine setting. You need some reductant. Well, this is a textbook roll front. Luckily, it's very close to my house. It's about 30 minutes away. Okay, this is in Turkey Creek by Golden. And what you've got going on here is you've got the basement is pretty close by. You've got oxidizing uranium-rich fluids that have migrated up a fault. They get into the sandstone, and the sandstone is again full of organics. Why? Why? Because it's a delta. You've got a river in flood. The river is carrying organics. It's bringing them out to sea. The delta front is full of organics, and those organics are providing the reductant for the uranium to precipitate out. So far, if you listen to this talk and you're like, you know what, Ali, we knew this stuff back in the 50s. You have not done anything today to enhance my understanding of uranium entrapment in sandstones. Well, I'll tell you what, I got something new for you. So I bet this is something you've never seen before. This is from the Go Boy mine near Palisade. And what you're looking at is the Mesa Verde group, so shallow marine sandstones. And what you're looking at here are Ophiomorpha burrows. Okay, so these were burrows made by Callianacid shrimp. So what do these shrimp do? Well, they're eating. Well, if they're eating, they're going to poop. And just like we add casing to a well to prevent borehole collapse, what these guys are doing is they're taking their poop and they reinforce their burrow walls with that poop. Now, when the shrimp are hanging out there, so are the bacteria. And what the bacteria are doing is they are creating reducing conditions in and around that burrow. Okay, so if you're creating reducing conditions in and around that burrow, and now you've got uranium-rich fluids, again, they're coming up through a fault, they're getting into the sandstone. These are delta front to upper shore face sandstones. Again, it's a high perm highway that uranium is going to keep on going until it meets a reductant, and this is where it's met that reductant. You can actually see some carnotite. I don't know how well the colors are showing on your screen, but you can see the rest of the sand host rock is brown. Around here, it's green, okay? And this is where you have the uranium mineralization. And the burrows are what's causing it, okay? Now, in the oil and gas business, we realize how important these burrows were a while ago. But they can form zones that can be up to a meter or two thick. This is someone who poured resin into these Callianacid burrows, and it shows that interconnected network. Like I said, these zones can be 1 to 2 meters thick, and they can go on for several hundreds of meters. Okay, so these are fairly widespread. I'm not trying to convince you to go mine a few burrows here and there. Okay, here's the sea floor. This is a picture I took in the Bahamas a few years ago. Of course, those are carbonates, but it's the same shrimp. These are Callianacid shrimp, and you can see how large their burrows are, and they're all over the seafloor. So they're providing the reductant in these shallow marine settings. All right, let's talk about aeolian systems. So we're like, oh, all right, so now we're in aeolian settings. How do we provide reductant here? Okay, what's going on? Well, so the first thing I did, I went in and I was comparing different aeolian lithophases and seeing if one of them was more prone to uranium than others. Why am I doing that? Well, because there's a big difference between porosity and permeability of these different sedimentary structure packages. Okay, so wind ripples tend to have tighter packing. They tend to get cemented more easily. Grain flow deposits have much greater primary porosities and permeabilities. So it's just subtle differences like that. I wanted to go test it out. I tested it out in the Entrada sandstone around some of these mines in the Rifle Mining District. And from what I found out, there really is no difference from going from one lithophases to another. Here you can see the carnotite on these grain flow deposits. Okay, so these are deposited on the lee side of the dune. So here's where that sample is coming from. These are grain flow deposits. On top are grain flow deposits as well. But this is where all the mineralization is at. In fact, the mineralization starts in these deposits right underneath the Entrada, which in here is the maroon. And these are fluvial. So what's going on? Why is it not facies specific? Well, it's not facies specific because in this particular case, you've got oxidizing fluids rising up. They hit this interface. And right when they hit that interface, the uranium precipitates out. So you're like, well, why is that happening? Okay, this is arid. This is arid. What's going on? Well, what I want you to do is I want you to compare some pictures. There's a picture of Delicate Arch, super iconic for those of you that are not from the US. It's in Arches National Park. Here's the Entrada sandstone. This is what the Entrada is supposed to look like. All right, it's supposed to be orangish to red. This is what the Entrada looks like in the Rifle area. Well, what's the difference? Well, this is not orange to red. This is totally white. Well, why is it white? Well, it's bleached. Well, what does that mean? Well, what that means is some sort of either hydrocarbon or hydrogen sulfide, something has passed through the sandstone. And the reason why this stuff is orange is because the quartz clasts have a hematitic coat on them. Well, when reducing fluids goes through, that hematite goes to pyrite, coats are gone, it's no longer red, it's white instead. So this is still red. So what you have, this is very permeable, this is not, which is why this is, you have those reducing fluids going through the higher permeable lithophases. Fluids are coming up, oxidized, they hit this interface right here, and right as they hit that interface, that is where you precipitate out the uranium. So it doesn't even reach the top of the sandstone. So even though the lithophases in the bottom third are the same, it's not really a function of the porosity and permeability in the lithophases within the Entrada. It's more about the interface. All right, we're going to talk about carbonates now. And these pictures are just to set you up. Almost every picture you've seen in this talk so far has been mine, except this one. Okay, I have not been to the Dead Sea, unfortunately. But what I want you to look at in this setting is it's an arid carbonate setting. Okay, we've got evaporite precipitation going on. So we've got evaporites precipitating, they're buckling, and we form this little TP. Okay, I want you to keep that picture in mind because we are going to come back to it. So this is just one facies belt. Here's a very similar setting, except this is from the Great Salt Lake in Utah. And you can see these giant desiccation cracks. And right along those cracks, you see this green stuff. Okay, what is that? Well, those are microbial organisms. And they're living there because right at those desiccation cracks, here you've got a bunch of tar seeps in the area. So these are organisms that love eating sulfur. Okay, and this is why they're growing right on these desiccation cracks. Now, these are organic rich. These organisms, they secrete these gels called these EPS gels. Again, for you, it's super organic rich. This is where your reductant is in this particular system. Okay, now here's the microbial carbonates, and between them, this is all halite. All right, so that's all evaporite. That's no good. Now, until 15 years ago, no one really cared about microbial carbonates except carbonate sedimentologists. They're like, all right, they're there, they're made by microorganisms and they're doing something, who cares? But about 10, 15 years ago, they made some huge hydrocarbon discoveries in the pre-salt microbialites offshore Brazil. And then everyone got super interested in microbialites. And our understanding of microbial carbonates has just got skyrocketed over the past 10, 15 years. So what you're seeing here is a schematic showing different facies belts in these microbial carbonates in a lacustrine setting. Bottom line is these things change along depositional dip. That is the moral of the story. And when they change, there are certain parts that are more evaporite rich. There are certain parts that are going to be more organic rich. That is something I want you to keep in mind. You can see that from the Pleistocene of the Great Salt Lake in Utah. You've got a whole bunch of thrombolites growing here. The next facies belts are Uwd grainstones, and you can see the present Great Salt Lake out there. Okay. Moral of the story is these facies occur as belts along the periphery of these lakes. So why did I go through that? Well, I went through that because while doing this project a few months ago, I was again near Rifle, and I went to what's called the End of Trail mine. And when I got up there, it's supposed to be a mine in the Morrison. And you get up there, and yes, it is a mine in the Morrison. It's a uranium mine. But when you look at the ore's not in the sandstone. The ore is in a carbonate. And I'm like, well, what is going on? How the hell do we get carbonate in the fluvial Morrison formation? Okay, well, we have lakes in the Morrison. And in those lakes, we have lacustrine carbonates. So I called up two friends of mine who are paleontologists, because I know back in the day, they used to work on some fossil fish from these Morrison lacustrine carbonates. I'm like, hey, where can I go check one of these things out? They're like, all right, you go to Canyon City, where the Morrison is sitting unconformably over the basement. And what happened? What do you think happened when I got out there? Can you hear that? That is the sound of music right there. Okay. So that sound effect right there, that is dedicated to all those uranium guys who spend all their days sitting in the office making N43 101 compliant reports and press releases and don't get out to be in the field anymore. Forgotten what a scintillometer sounds like, but that's what happens. I get out there, this thing is blowing up, and now I'm not even on the outcrop yet. So what's going on here? Well, you've got more microbial carbonates. In this case, they're not very large. You can see here's a liolite, which is it's kind of like a stromatolite without the laminations. Okay, and this is where we're concentrating all the organics. How much uranium are we getting? Well, it's not much. I mean, we're talking about, I collected the sample and we're talking about 250 parts per million. So you're like, well, that's not very exciting. Yeah, you're right. It's not very exciting, but it begs the question, well, what do we have to do to make it exciting? Okay, so to make it exciting, let's go to the Todilto limestone in New Mexico. And what the folks there used to do back in the day is they would look for anticlines, which were, again, places where things had buckled because of these evaporites along the margins of this lake in the Jurassic. And then they would just go and mine along the hinge of the anticline, where they would expecting, all the uranium mineralization to be. So here's one of those spots. You can see the anticline's been broken. They've broken this thing up. There's a bunch of mines in this area. The Todilto's produced over 3,300 tons. But when you're walking around this area, this is the Zaya Lahara area, pretty close to Grants, and you're walking around, and it's not. Yeah, you see a lot of cool deformation in these evaporites, but you're not really seeing that much uranium mineralization. So it's not very exciting. But then you just drive a few miles, and you get close to Haystack Mountains, and when you get there, man, it gets beautiful because you can see thiahumanite right here. Okay, and where is it? Is it random? No, it's not. It is definitely not random. It is occurring right at these bedding planes. Okay, so what's going on here? Here's another picture. We're looking at a close-up, and when you're looking at a close-up, you can see thiahumanite and carnotite right on the bedding planes. Well, why is that right on the bedding planes? Well, that's where you have these EPS gels, these organic rich gels, these organisms accreting. But how does a stromatolite grow? Well, they don't have arms to collect carbonate, right? So they have these sticky gels, and then carbonate sticks onto those sticky gels, and that's how they keep growing. Okay, those sticky gels are the sites of uranium entrapment. Okay, so again, the organics in those stromatolites are providing the reductant for uranium that's coming up probably along faults and fractures. So what is the moral of the story? Well, again, the moral of the story is big difference between Zaya, Lahara, and Haystack Mountains. Why? Well, because we're on different facies belts. When you're on Zaya and Lahara, you've got a lot more evaporites. Yes, the microbial carbonates are there, but they're like that picture I showed you from the Morrison. It's not as bad, but they're not that prolific. Okay, so right here, when you get closer to Haystack Mountains, you're getting a much thicker accumulation of not the evaporites, but of these microbial carbonates themselves. And you have a lot more reductant, and that is what's making this thing tick. Okay, now I'll assure you, I've talked to some folks about this, folks that are drilling wells in the pre-salt of Brazil, and their uranium spikes and some of their microbial carbonates are insane. Okay, so the moral of the story is, once you do a deliberate search, folks talk about uranium and carbonates, and they're like, yeah, the only example in the world where it's been mineable and it's economic is the Todilto. We have no other examples. But how many other examples have people deliberately gone and searched for? Okay, and that is something that I urge you to do. Okay, because again, it's about finding the right facies belt with respect to reductant. All right, this is one of the last slides I have. If you are working in Kazakhstan, if you're working in Wyoming, if you're working in Texas, and you watch this talk and you're like, what a jip. All this guy did was show cool pictures of outcrops, and we don't even get to look at the rocks. Okay, we're doing ISR or ISL, and all we're looking at is cuttings. Well, you know what, man? You can take a core. You can definitely take a core, and I would strongly urge you to take a core. In fact, I know in the Colorado Plateau they take core, but then they don't slab it. Okay, in fact, I remember reaching out to someone who works on uranium currently, and he was putting up pictures of the Morrison, and I was like, hey, you know, if you ever want your Morrison core described for uranium, let me know. And he just disappeared. And he's probably thinking, what is this fruitcake gonna do? This fruitcake wants to look at my core. I can just take my handheld XRF, run it on my core. I know exactly where everything is at. What is this guy gonna add? Well, what I'll tell you is, if you don't have core, then there's no way we can predict what these channels behave like. And if we don't know what these channels behave like, we don't understand their architecture, then we cannot predict where that reductant is going to be preserved, because the preservation of reductant, as I've showed you earlier, is not random. Okay, so hopefully, if there's one thing you take away from this talk and you are currently drilling for uranium, is take core and slap that core. Okay, I cannot stress that enough. This picture is from it's from a paper that was published last month by an Australian mining company, where they did some very, very cool work, but they were able to do that cool work because they took core, they slabbed it, they integrated sedimentology with a lot of the other technology that they have. All right, so where do we go from here? Well, I'll tell you, there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing more of the same. Okay, it's been pretty successful so far, but you know, there's no harm in innovation. And the stuff that I've showed you today is not new technology. It's not expensive technology. It's going back to the basics, except that the basics have come a long way since the last uranium boom. In fluvial systems, the channel connectivity, distribution of plant material, and architectural elements, we can predict that. And if we can predict that, we can predict where the reductant is going to be. Okay, and if we can do that, we can predict things at the mine scale, and hopefully, you looked at those maps from Adrian Hartley's group, where they were showing different channel proportions that can predict things at a basin scale. If you're going to be looking at uranium in shallow marine deposits, keep in mind that along the western interior Cretaceous Seaway, there are deltas that punctuate the coastline every 20 to 30 kilometers. And again, those are sites where reductant is being introduced into the system. In aeolian settings, if the sandstone is not bleached, then there's most likely no reductant. And if there's no reductant, man, it's slim pickings then. Carbonate occurrences are more common than expected. And again, it's a matter of finding the right facies combination, of course, in an area with a proven uranium source. So hopefully, after today, you guys will put a little bit more sedimentology back into sediment-hosted uranium. So I thank you for your time. And at this point, I'll take any questions that people have.
There's been a